Hello, my name is Jenna Ward, and this is my screencast reflection for my final portfolio for Rhetoric and Composition 2001. So I'd like to start with, first I have some lovely pictures up here of my semester in Boone, and this is my statement from the author. So this class has challenged me as a writer. It's encouraged me to look deeper into my abilities of recognizing and employing rhetorical analysis, and this portfolio is going to showcase 3 final edited works from this semester and how my application of all of the course goals is apparent through my continuous editing of these works. And I'm also going to show you 6 additional works and how I employed 2 different methods of citations. So that would be APA and MLA. So let's get started. So I would like to start with my first major project, which is the annotated bibliography. So I had some formatting and technical issues in the annotated bibliography. One struggle that I encountered a lot was using too much personal voice, and I referred back to the course goals of RC 2001, and one of those goals is to analyze and respond to diverse rhetorical situations, and another one is to be able to read and analyze texts from various genres and disciplines. And I feel that I've done that very well in this final version of my annotated bibliography. So my first source here is a scholarly article about the effects of mass incarceration on communities of color. And one thing that I initially did not do in my sourcing for this, I didn't include the credibility of both authors. And you'll see that as I go through my annotated bibliography, I did extra research to find all of these authors' credentials and include how that makes my piece stronger. So this author here, he was actually a retired judge for the 4th Division of the Superior Court of North Carolina. So that's a very credible source, and it makes me conclude that his arguments are very unbiased and they're rooted in American legality, which is incredibly important for my subject of mass incarceration. Another thing that I worked to include in all of my sourcing, I worked to not just address the thematic elements of each piece, but I wanted to make sure that I was actually quoting these authors and that I was actually summarizing rather than taking my own personal interpretation from the source. So you'll see this in my paragraph right here. I started to develop a new line of thinking. So this line of thinking is that stereotyping entire communities as criminal tends to arise when people of color are incarcerated in communities with primarily similar racial makeup. So I really started diving into the text even further than I did in my first drafts, and I used what these authors were getting at to make my annotation stronger and make my research more bulky and with credibility. Another thing that I feel that I do quite well in this new annotated bibliography, I do use a rhetorical lens for understanding and evaluating all of these texts. So initially I felt that I was taking too much liberty with the subjects, and I feel that in order to correctly and accurately and properly write about mass incarceration, I really need to refer to the experts. So in all of these sources, you can see that I really started adding in more statistics, I started adding in more research, and I use direct quotes. I changed my formatting in all of these to appear more credible and more well-versed, and I feel that I do this quite well. I'm able to have my personal interpretation of the text, but maintain the credibility of the source. One last thing that I'd like to point out with my new annotated bibliography, Many of my sources are multiple hundred pages long, and this requires deep analysis, but it also requires really good summarizing technique. So from all of our practice this semester on rhetorical analysis of smaller articles and public genre articles, I was able to correctly and succinctly dive into these sources. And you can see I have the DOI links. That's another thing that I took care with in editing these. And I make sure that all of my authors' integrity is protected in these by correctly citing them and making sure that their information is used properly. So I think now I will move on to my second major project. Thank you so much. My second major project of the semester is my public genre, and this project actually really excited me. I've never been able to do a project like this in any of my classes, and I really enjoyed the setup of this semester and being able to have my first version, talk with the professor, and get feedback on this and feedback from my peers as well. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here. So this is called The Land of the Free, and this is my public genre about how mass incarceration disproportionately affects people of color and how it is held up by two pillars of American society, and that is poverty and racism. I made a design choice here to change the colors of this Venn diagram because I wanted mass incarceration to be bold. I wanted it to stand out, and I wanted it to almost seem like a very simple equation. A plus B equals C. Poverty plus racism equals mass incarceration. And below this, I include the definition because one thing that I struggled with, I was using too complex language in this public genre, and I felt that it was important to make this digestible to a public audience. So in order to do that, I would need to provide definitions of these terms, especially seeing as they're fairly new terms. And I did that with mass incarceration. I also did that with a term down here, disenfranchisement. So many public audiences, they don't know what disenfranchisement is, but it's so important to our political makeup in America. So down here, I included statistics on what disenfranchisement is and how it disproportionately affects people of color, specifically Black men. And I'd like to take it back up. Here I include a public domain image, which I did not do in my first draft. And I feel that it works really well in this setup because it's very linear. I already included the arrows in red to make the color more bold, stand out to a public audience, and I feel that this picture is almost like the end of a cycle. So in this system of mass incarceration, the removal of members from a population, the social and economic suffering of the population, and the recidivism of those released prisoners, this picture sums that up quite well. So I'm very happy with that. And I also do want to point out some other design notes. I tried to make this more clear, more linear. In my initial version of the public genre, I had too much going on some pages and I didn't have enough on others. So this effects page is really the crown jewel of this final version of the public genre. So you can see I used arrows to make it clear, to kind of seem like stepping stones. That's what I wanted it to look like. So I reference housing insecurity and how that affects parental incarceration and child homelessness, and how children of incarcerated parents suddenly have to rely on outdated and underfunded welfare services. So these arrows and this coloring, I feel like it's very bold, it stands out, and it translates to a public audience, because normally this kind of information is very hard to digest. So yeah, and I included a graph down here to make those numbers clear of the disenfranchisement of Black men and the likelihood of imprisonment of Black men by age 23. It's very clear and stark. And that pretty much sums up my final public genre. I ended it with a fact sheet because sometimes I feel like those are very snappy and they get people involved. All of these hyperlinks, they lead the public genre to other sources. So all of these can be backed up with these very simple to click hyperlinks, colored in red. They make it clear to the eye, they make this subject digestible, and they make this a personal responsibility. All right, thank you so much. With the idea of personal responsibility, I made a choice to employ both logos and pathos in this public genre, and you can see this down here. The logos part of it is obviously going to be the statistical research and the empirical evidence, but I also wanted to use pathos to make this seem like this is a subject that must be talked about in discourse. It must be discussed by people of varying educational levels because it affects communities everywhere. And with that being said, I will move on to my major project number 3. My third major project is my literature review, and I'll scroll down here. In my third major project, I mainly struggled with organization, and I can point out here, I changed some of my sections around to affect my flow in a positive way. I also redid this, and I redid my title page as well, which you can see. It's in good formatting, and I also learned in my conference that when I make a new paragraph, that essentially wipes the citation slate clean, so you can see that I recited, and I went through essentially the entire piece to do this, and I really just wanted to go through organizationally. I felt incredibly proud of the work that I produced, but the work that I produced also deserved the right flow to make it work. So you can see all my sources below. This entire piece really encapsulates Goal 3 of RC 2001. I applied so much disciplinary awareness to the creation of this text, and I really had to synthesize multiple sources. All of these are scholarly sources, and I feel that I really grew from doing this synthesizing versus my first annotated bibliography, the first draft of that major project 1. I feel that I really was able to garner better information that pertained to my topic. So yeah, that's my major project number 3. And it was a variety of genres. I ended up constraining my topic to public health and mass incarceration's effect on health. So I really did have to find new sources, but I had no trouble with this because I knew where to look, and I did really, really thorough research for this major project number 3. So let's continue. My documentation of my sources. I have my public genre reflection demonstrating that I know how to write in MLA, and you can see down here, these are my MLA style citations. And you can also see for my literature review, these are my APA style citations. So I demonstrate here that I know how to write in both styles.